I am an old man in Norway, and every year before the first frost I spend one cold afternoon sealing my windows and doors. It costs me a few dollars and 1 hour of my time, and it is the whole reason the cold never really gets into my house. The afternoon I do it is always the same kind of day. The sky has gone flat and grey, there is frost on the grass in the shadow of the woodshed, and you can smell winter coming the way you smell rain. I take a roll of foam strip out of the drawer, a small knife, and I go from room to room. Around the front door, around the tall window in the kitchen where my wife used to keep her plants, around the door out to the yard that never did close quite right. An hour later I am finished, and the house is quieter. You can hear it. A sealed house has a different sound than a leaky one. The first time an old builder explained it to me, years ago, it surprised me. The most expensive thing about heating a house in winter is not the furnace, and it is not the wood. It is the warm air you already paid to heat, slipping out through gaps so small you cannot feel them with your hand. You heat the air leaves, you heat more, all winter long. Most men worry about the big things, the furnace, the price of oil or electricity, the old windows they cannot afford to replace, and the whole time the money is leaving through a crack around the door you could close for the price of a sandwich. I am not going to tell you a roll of foam will cut your heating bill in half. That is a promise other men make, and it is not an honest one. What I will tell you is this: sealing the gaps around your doors and windows is the cheapest warm air you will ever keep. It takes one afternoon, and there is no other repair in the whole house that gives you back so much for so little. A new furnace costs thousands. A roll of weather stripping costs less than lunch. The window you are leaving open all winter is one you do not even know is open. Let me show you where it is. Stand in a room on a cold, windy day, close everything up and hold the back of a wet hand near the edge of a window. You will feel it. A thin, cool thread of moving air. It does not feel like much. That is the trick of it. Not one of those gaps feels like anything. But add them all together. The thin line of daylight under the front door, the seam where the window slides against its frame, the place where the top and bottom halves of the window meet in the middle. The people who measure these things for a living will tell you that in an ordinary, older house, the total comes out to about the same as leaving one window wide open all day and all night from October to April. Nobody would leave a window open all winter on purpose. You would walk across the room and shut it. But that is exactly what a leaky house is doing, in a dozen small places at once, and because you cannot see it, you pay for it without ever once deciding to. There is a reason it works this way, and it is worth understanding, because it tells you where to look. Warm air rises. It climbs to the ceiling and finds the gaps up high, at the top of the window and around the attic hatch, and it pushes out. And every bit of warm air that leaves out the top has to be replaced, so the house pulls cold air in down low, under the door and along the floor. That is why your feet are cold in a room that feels warm at head height. It is not your imagination, and it is not poor circulation. It is a house breathing its warm air out the top and pulling winter in at the bottom. So here is the rule, and it is the whole idea in one sentence. Seal the moving gaps first. The places where something opens and closes, the door and the window sash, are where the cheapest and biggest leaks are, for a simple reason. Those gaps have to be loose enough to move, and loose enough to move is loose enough to leak. Catch those, and you have caught most of the draft in the house for the price of a few rolls of foam. Sealing the house before winter is not a clever trick I invented. Where I come from, it was a season, the same way raking leaves is a season, and it had its own equipment. When I was a boy, every house in the valley had a second set of windows. Not double pane glass the way you buy it now, that did not exist yet. These were separate wooden window frames, each with its own glass, that we set into the opening on the inside every fall, turning one layer of glass into two, with a pocket of still air trapped in between. In the spring we took them out again, washed them, and carried them down to the cellar to wait for the next winter. I can still see my father doing it. Every year, on the first cold weekend of October, he would go down the cellar stairs and bring them up two at a time, the glass cold and beaded from the damp down there. Each one was marked in pencil for the room it belonged to, because they were not interchangeable, and he would fit each into its own window and press a strip of ceiling around the edge. By the time he was done, the house had changed. The windows stopped weeping in the cold. The rooms held their heat into the evening. That was the day winter officially began. This was not one family's habit. The conservators at the Folk Museum in Oslo, whose whole job is to keep track of how people actually lived, will tell you the inside winter window came into common use here in the late 1800s and stayed in nearly every home right up until the middle of the last century, when factory-made double glass finally made it unnecessary. For the better part of 100 years, house after house put its windows on for the winter and took them off in the spring, the same way you put on a coat and hang it up again when the weather turns. Think about what that means. This was not a handful of especially careful people. It was the normal, expected, everybody-does-it way to get a house ready for the cold. A whole country had settled, without ever holding a meeting about it, on one plain truth. The cheapest way to stay warm is to stop the warm air from leaving in the first place. The furnace came second. The seal came first. There was real science in those old frames, though nobody called it that. The thing that keeps you warm is not the glass. It is the thin pocket of trapped air between the two panes. Air that cannot move cannot carry heat away, and once you pin it still between two layers, it turns into a blanket. That is the same reason a wool sweater is warm and a down coat is warm. Not the wool or the feathers, but the still air held inside them. Every ceiling job you do is really just a way of pinning the air down and keeping it still. You cannot buy those old winter windows anymore, and you would not want to wash them. But the idea inside them is the very same idea in the drawer where I keep my roll of foam. Trap the warm air, stop the draft. Do it before the frost, not after. There are only two kinds of gap in a house, and each one has its own fix. And if you think your house is the tight, well-built exception, the odds are against you. The people at Energy Star, who study American homes for a living, reckon that 9 out of 10 houses in your country leak more air than they should. 9 out of 10. Yours is very likely one of them, and that is good news, because it means the cheapest fix in the house is still sitting there waiting for you. The first kind is a gap that has to move, the bottom of a door, the edge of a window where the sash slides. These open and close, so you cannot fill them solid. You have to seal them with something soft that springs back every time. That is what weather stripping is. The cheapest and easiest is a roll of foam tape with sticky backing. You wipe the surface clean, peel it, and press it along the frame where the door or window closes against it. For the channels a window slides in, there is a springy V-shaped strip that folds open and pushes gently against the sash. And for the bottom of a door, where the single biggest draft in most houses lives, there is a door sweep, a strip with a rubber or brush edge that screws to the bottom of the door and drags lightly across the floor. That one part, a few dollars, up to a dozen or so, stops the cold river that runs across your feet. The second kind of gap does not move at all. The seam where the window frame meets the wall. The place where trim is pulled away over the years as the house settled. These you fill solid, and the tool for that is a tube of caulk and a caulk gun. Run a bead along the seam, smooth it once with a wet finger, and it is done for years. The mistake most people make is sealing the gaps they can see and missing the ones that cost them the most. In a great many houses, the worst leak is not around a window at all. It is the hatch to the attic, the little panel or the pull-down stairs in an upstairs ceiling.
That gap is almost never sealed, and it sits at the very top of the house, right where the warm air is trying hardest to escape. The people who measure these things say a quarter-inch gap around an attic hatch lets out about as much air as a full heating duct pushes in. One unsealed hatch can undo a whole afternoon of careful work on the windows downstairs. So the order matters, and it follows the air. Start at the top, the attic hatch and any gap up high where the warm air pushes out. Then the living spaces, the doors and windows you use every day. Then down low, the door to the basement and the place where the house sits on its foundation. Top to bottom, because that is the direction the warm air is trying to go, and you want to close the door behind it on every floor.
Now the part other men leave out. A roll of foam will not cut your heating bill in half. I said so at the start, and I will say it again here, plainly, because you deserve the real number. The people who study this, the Department of Energy among them, find that sealing the air leaks in an ordinary house saves somewhere between 10 and 20% on the heating bill. In a genuinely old and leaky house, it can run higher. That is a real number, and it is a good one. Across a season's heating, it is real money back in your pocket, and the materials cost so little you earn it back before Christmas. But it is not half, and any man who tells you a single roll of foam will halve your bill is selling you something. The bigger truth hidden inside that number is this: most of your savings come from finding the few worst leaks, not from sealing every last window to perfection. One open attic hatch, one bad door, one gap behind the trim of a big window on the windy side of the house, those cost you more than all the little seams put together. Find the big ones first. Do not spend an afternoon fussing over a tight little window while the hatch above your head stands open. And there is one caution I want you to take seriously, more seriously than the money. A house needs to breathe a little. If you heat with a flame, a gas furnace, a gas water heater, a wood stove, anything that burns, that flame needs air, and it needs a clear path to send its exhaust up the chimney and out. Seal a house up too tight around an appliance like that, and you can cause it to draw its own exhaust back down into the room instead of up the flue. That exhaust can carry carbon monoxide, which you cannot see and cannot smell. So do not seal over the vents that are meant to be there. When you run a wood stove, let the room have a little air. And whatever else you do this winter, put a carbon monoxide alarm on the wall near where you sleep, if you do not have one already. A $10 alarm is not optional in a sealed, heated house. It is the price of doing this safely. The old winter windows I grew up with, you cannot buy anymore. But the principle travels just fine. A storm window on the outside, or even a sheet of clear plastic film shrunk tight over a drafty window on the inside for the season, does the same job the old ones did. A second layer, a pocket of still air, the draft stopped. Different tools, the same 100-year-old idea. Here is what to do, and you can start this weekend. First, find the leaks, and this part costs you nothing. Pick a cold, windy day. Close every window and door and turn off the furnace or the air handler so nothing is blowing. Light a stick of incense, the kind that smokes steadily, and walk it slowly around the edge of every window and door, along the sill, around the frame, across the bottom. Where the smoke bends sideways or gets pulled toward a crack, you have found a leak. Mark it with a piece of tape. Test the doors a second way too. Close a door on a dollar bill and pull. If the bill slides out with no drag at all, the seal at that spot is gone, and your warm air is going with it. Then go to the big hardware store you already know, and it is a short list. A roll of foam weather strip tape, $8 to $12, for the seams where doors and windows close. A couple of the V-shaped spring strips for the channels windows slide in. A door sweep, around $12 for the bottom of your most used outside door. One tube of exterior caulk and a caulk gun, maybe $15 for the pair, for the fixed gaps where frames meet the wall. A bag of foam gaskets, a few dollars, for the outlets on your outside walls, a spot almost nobody thinks of. And if there is no carbon monoxide alarm near your bedroom,
Buy that before anything else on the list. Then pick your cold afternoon and work top to bottom. Seal the attic hatch first. That is the one that pays. Then the doors and windows you live with every day, the foam along the closing seams, the sweep on the door, the caulk in the fixed gaps you found with the incense. Then the door down to the basement. When you are done, stand in the middle of a room, the way I do in mine, and listen. The house will be quieter. That quiet is the sound of the warm air staying where you paid to put it. That is the whole thing. One short list, one cold afternoon, a few dollars on the counter. Not a furnace, not a window replacement, not a loan. A roll of foam and a knife. My father did it with his winter windows and a pencil. I do it with a roll of foam and an hour of my time. And every winter since, when the wind comes flat and gray across the yard and the frost sits in the shadow of the woodshed, I sit inside a warm, quiet house and let it blow.